Have you ever stopped to wonder how an experimental medicine, one that could be a massive breakthrough, actually gets from a lab to a patient in a clinical trial anywhere in the world? Well, it all depends on this hidden, incredibly high-stakes logistics network called the clinical supply chain. So let's pull back the curtain and see exactly how this whole thing works. At its very heart, the entire system has one single non-negotiable mission, and it is all about the patient. The goal is to ensure no enrolled patient ever misses a dose of their assigned treatment. Now, that sounds simple enough, but that one sentence hides an absolutely incredible amount of complexity. So in this explainer, we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk about what makes this mission so high stakes. Then, we'll walk through the 6-stage journey of the medicine itself. We'll cover some of the essential lingo you need to know. And finally, we'll wrap up with why this entire process is just so incredibly difficult. Okay, so first things first, what makes this system so fundamentally different from, say, how a bottle of soda gets to your local supermarket? We'll just think about the contrast here. On the one hand, a commercial supply chain is all about moving approved products to a pretty predictable market. If something goes wrong, it's a problem, for sure, but it's usually a customer service issue. The clinical supply chain, on the other hand, is moving unapproved experimental drugs, where the demand is a total question mark. And here, a failure isn't just some logistical hiccup, it can actually jeopardize the entire scientific study and, most importantly, it can harm a patient who's waiting for what could be a life-changing treatment. Right, so to really get how it all works, let's walk through the 6 stages of the journey that every single dose of an experimental medicine takes. It all kicks off with a plan. Teams build a forecast, trying to predict how much drug they're going to need. But the problem is, that forecast depends on predicting something that is notoriously unpredictable: how many patients will actually join the trial and where in the world they'll be. Get the forecast wrong, and you either have a shortage, risking a patient missing a dose, or a massive surplus of incredibly expensive medicine that just goes to waste. Next up, you have to actually make the drug. This is done under ridiculously strict quality standards called Good Manufacturing Practice, or GMP. And at the end of that whole process stands a critical gatekeeper called the qualified person, or QP. Now, this person has to personally sign off on every single batch. If they find even a tiny issue, the whole batch is stopped. No signature, no shipment. The QP is personally accountable, and their word is final. Once the drug is made, it's got to be packaged and labeled. And this isn't just about putting it in a box. In a lot of trials, you have to blind the study, which means nobody, not the doctor, not the patient, knows who got the real drug versus a placebo. So the packaging has to be absolutely identical. A tiny labeling mistake that breaks that blind can completely ruin the scientific integrity of the whole trial. And remember, these labels have to be perfect in dozens of languages for global studies. Stage 4, shipping. This is a massive logistical challenge. You see, many new medicines are fragile and have to be kept at a precise temperature. This is what we call the cold chain. We're talking about maintaining, say, -80 degrees from a factory in Europe all the way to a remote clinic in Africa. A single power outage or a customs delay that causes the temperature to spike, even for a moment, can render an entire shipment completely useless. Okay, so with drugs at hundreds of clinics all over the globe, how do you possibly keep track of it all? The answer is a piece of software called an IRT, or Interactive Response Technology. This is basically the digital nervous system of the entire supply chain. It tells the clinic which kit to give to which patient, and automatically orders more when stock gets low. But if this system glitches, it could send the wrong medicine or, even worse, let a clinic completely run out. And finally, believe it or not, when the trial's over, it's still not done. Every single vial, whether it was used, unused, or damaged, has to be accounted for. Everything gets shipped back, counted, and checked against the records. If those numbers don't match up perfectly, it can trigger some really serious questions from regulators about how the trial was actually run. It is all about total, complete accountability. Okay, now that we've walked through the whole process, let's just quickly clear up a few key terms you're definitely going to hear when people talk about the clinical supply chain. First up is IMP, which stands for Investigational Medicinal Product. This is the official term for the experimental drug that's being tested. The key thing to remember here is that this is a legal category. The rules for handling an IMP are totally different from a regular approved medicine. Next, you'll hear about placebo and comparator. A placebo is basically a dummy pill. It's got no active ingredient, and it's used to see if the new drug works better than nothing at all. A comparator, on the other hand, is an existing approved drug, and it's used to see if the new drug is actually better than what's already out there. You're also going to hear the terms drug substance and drug product. So, drug substance is the raw active powder, that's the core ingredient. Drug product is the finished form, the final pill or the injection that's all ready to be given to a patient. And here's a super simple analogy to make it stick. Think of raw popcorn kernels. That's the drug substance. The potential is there, but you can't use it yet. Then there's that whole complex process of popping it, seasoning it, and packaging it. That turns it into the drug product, the finished bag you're ready to eat. The clinical supply chain is that entire transformation process. So after seeing all those stages, let's just pull it all together. What are the core reasons this whole thing is so mind-bogglingly difficult? Really, the difficulty of this whole process can be boiled down to these 4 core challenges. The demand is fundamentally uncertain. The rules of the study itself can literally change halfway through, forcing the entire supply chain to adapt on the fly. You're often dealing with a drug that has a very short shelf life, but takes a super long time to make. And above all, always, there are the immense human stakes. And that right there brings us back to the most important point of all. In a normal supply chain, the consequence of failure is a lost sale, maybe an unhappy customer. In the clinical supply chain, the consequence of failure is a patient, a real person who might have very limited options, missing a dose of a therapy that could potentially change their entire life. So, the system is complex, the stakes are incredibly high, and everything is designed to protect the patient and the science. But that leaves us with a really fascinating final question. Now that you understand how it works, the next question is, why are the decisions within this system so incredibly hard? And why are difficult trade-offs a constant, unavoidable reality? And that is a question for another time.